At this point, I wanted to turn it over to our friend Mark Kroese, who will be talking about his adventures in the mother of all enterprises, Microsoft.
I know I looked younger on TV, but that was 14 years ago. That gig was actually kind of fun. It was very part-time. It was sort of between 98 and 2004, late 03. Sort of at this point in time when Martha had some legal issues and the show went on hiatus, and that's kind of when it ended. But I'll tell you, the best part about being there was she always had the most interesting people on the set. So whenever you were there on a certain day to shoot, because it wasn't live, there would be all these, we'd all go to lunch. So it was with, you know, Colin Powell one time, and Bono, and Donna Karan, and Michael Milken was there talking about his all-soy diet and how he went on remission from cancer. So anyway, it was kind of fun to do that. But it's actually was kind of awkward to sit there and think, oh my God, in 1998, it was actually a relevant discussion to talk about an ISP and what that is, and here's how the cloud works. And you know, you're all probably going, whoa. But there was a set of people that actually thought that was interesting back then. So anyway, I'm going to, I was just in Barcelona, all inspired by Gaudi. I'm going to talk about a couple things. One is innovation that I appreciate. Like all of us, we go through our lives every day. We encounter good products, bad products. I'm just going to kind of talk about a few things that I really like. Stuff I've contributed to. And I was at Microsoft from 87 to 98, and I left for 6 years. And then I went back from basically 04 to last year. And the first stint was all about amazing innovation happening. And the second stint was about occasional innovation. I mean, some good things happened during that second stint, but I went back to a company that was very different and had lost a lot of confidence and was spending a lot more time chasing taillights than innovating. So the examples I'm going to use are from sort of the golden age, the early days of really the point I felt like was in the most pure environment of innovators and just swept up in this whole thing and around so many people. When you're in your room with 25 people and you're like, wow, I am by far the least talented person in this room, and people are all scary smart. That was a really cool period of time. So I'm going to talk about that. And then ways to kind of foster and inspire innovation and make it stick and get unstuck. And then some time for discussion. So I always appreciate when I see kind of existing categories that people think that they're done. And those categories don't, there's just, you know, everything that's been done with cars or certain whatever has been done. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, people just start innovating. So breathing new life into old categories. For example, there was this company called Honda that reinvented the trunk. They reimagined the whole car. I mean, this was the start of the cup holder generation, right? Where it wasn't just about the engine and the drivetrain and stuff. So they said, well, you know, instead of lifting the groceries over the trunk, which had a tall lip, they were the first ones to come out with a trunk that actually scooped all the way down to a lower level. That was innovation. And it's so obvious, right? Company I love, Lululemon. So, you know, the whole new generation of Whole Foods yoga people all run around with their Lululemon clothing. And I think this is a great company because they make great clothing, but they don't sell clothing. They sell a better version of you through all of this inspirational messaging in their stuff. And it carries from the products. You know, it's like literally written into the hem of the shirt about doing something and breathing and doing something positive and engaging with nice people, and all the way through to the sales floor. So, you know, I go into Lululemon and, you know, we're all vulnerable to certain sales tactics. So I'm sitting in there, I go in there like for a pair of shorts, and this really perky 20-something comes up, and she's very interested in what I do, and she says like, well, you're obviously an athlete. I'm like, oh. And then there's another kind of marketing study person up here, a version of me going, you're totally being schooled, dude. Like, you know, and like, yeah, shut up. Yes, yeah. And so, you know, I'm really captivated by Lululemon because they do such a good job making you feel great. And even though I'm hyper aware of the fact that I'm like being worked, I walked out of with $384 for the stuff I didn't need, and I'll go back. But this is their manifesto, right? So I think it's a very interesting innovation example because it's about innovating through inspiration. More simplistic, innovating through, you know, just a better mousetrap with function. The waterproof zipper really changed a lot with this company, Arc'teryx. So this is a company in '98 said, we're going to reinvent the Gore-Tex jacket. And they noticed that North Face was out there selling, pejoratively, mall approachwear to larger framed people, and that they'd sort of lost their core audience of like the athletic, slim, uber person. And Arc'teryx came and said, no, we are for athletes only, and we're going to have not box cut stuff. We're going to have really good stuff, and it's going to feel great if you're of that ilk. And it was just sort of this aspirational quality brand that all of a sudden people were buying $500 Gore-Tex jackets, and it's really pretty amazing. A company I think we probably all experienced, Amazon.com. They innovate through selection, but they also, to me, innovate through convenience. I mean, I've really just got to the point where I don't go online and comparison shop anymore, because I kind of don't want the answer to be some other website, because then I got to fill out the form and do all this stuff, and I'm a one-click guy, and I'm sure that I don't always buy the cheapest stuff, but I do buy from Amazon. Howard Schultz has been quoted many times saying the best thing Starbucks does is the couch, and that they created a place for people to go, and that in and of itself, the coffee, some people say it's the best ever, so other people complain about it, whatever. But people kind of go for the place. And they really did innovate at a retail level through place. Company I love, Trader Joe's, they don't make anything except they've innovated through buying, through having a procured, curated selection of stuff that's really interesting and great. And people go there for that reason. It's their kind of procurement and selection. Company I'm a big fan of. I used to do a lot of triathlons, had my Polar watch, my heart rate and all that stuff. In comes Garmin, and in 2 years they displaced Polar as the de facto standard for athletic measurement, because they had deep functionality, which Polar had too. But Polar, oh my God, it was so complicated, and this is just way simpler. And I'm amazed at how quickly they got everyone to buy the $500 thing again. So it's always interesting to see that. So I'm going to talk about stuff that I was involved with. Again, I said sort of during my first stint at Microsoft, I was employee about 1,000, and that was '87. And by this time, by '92 or so, the company was about 5,000 people, or maybe even 10,000 people, but it was still kind of felt small. And most importantly, our leader, Bill Gates, was very, very, very involved. And there were two businesses that he was very focused on, Windows and Office. Not surprisingly, the two businesses the company still has today that are most of the company. And it was really, you talk about the golden age of greenfield opportunity. When I look back at how much there was undone and how much just greenfield opportunity there was, it was amazing. I mean, the sort of the desktop apps problem. How many people ever back in the day used WordPerfect or Lotus 1-2-3? Okay, I see some hands. Back in the DOS key prompt days. So you had these really powerful but intimidating products, and the customer perception was that, oh, that's nothing I could ever master. That's not for me. That's just too inaccessible. A lot of what we called the everyday features were missing, and they just people didn't think like, oh, that's something I can do. We noticed there was this real desire for compound documents, basically taking spreadsheet stuff and putting it into a Word document, and that and mixing, and the term cut and paste comes from literally people cutting and taking white paste and putting a chart and putting it down on leaving a space in the Word document and pasting it in. And there was this whole user frustration of not being able to express what they want. And I think that's a really important part of innovation, is being able to look at what people are trying to do, but to figure out what they mean to do, not what they're saying, because the person's expression of what they're trying to do and their actual intent are often very different. And I think people that are good at contextual inquiry and social anthropology can really look at that and identify what is the essence of what the person's trying to do, even that they may not be good at expressing it. And that the particular people that were from Carnegie Mellon, this woman named Mary Daly and this guy Rick Rashid, who runs Microsoft Research today, there was this whole kind of cadre of people that were really, really good at that science of understanding user intent, and that was a key part of it. So So the Office opportunity was really, okay, Microsoft's driving this transition anyway from the DOS world to the Windows world. So we've moved all these people over to Windows. WordPerfect and Lotus are saying to their customer base, we're going to do a Windows version 2. So those customers have already resigned to the fact that they have to change. And it's change from WordPerfect for DOS to WordPerfect for Windows, or from WordPerfect for DOS to Word. And similarly with the Lotus situation. So there was just abundant low-hanging fruit. Bill was a CEO, CTO support is really saying Bill Gates was personally involved in pushing. And you could kind of walk around the company and say, well, Bill said, and this is our mission from him, and people did stuff that way. It helps. And so we had plenty of money and tons of good talent. So that was sort of the backdrop. There was like all this energy and all this great stuff. We were kind of inventing this as we went along. And I look back at that and I compare that to sort of the second time I was at Microsoft. You say, well, what's easier? Is it easier to really decipher user intent, or to chase your competition's taillights? So Zune, as a music service, is chasing Apple's taillights right off the MP3 cliff, and that didn't go so well. But here was an example back in the Office days where we were really looking into the customer's behavior deeply, and deciphering user intent, which is really, really hard work, but ultimately, I think where the answers for innovation lie, is observing deeply what people are doing and having the skills and the training to do contextual inquiry, to do other types of research and figure out, oh, therefore this is what we want. And again, it's not always what people say they want. And so if there's any kind of meta message in this presentation, it's, I think the source of innovation is in your customer's behavior, more so than your competitors' behavior. And boy, I tell you, in enterprises, particularly a large company like Microsoft, you want to get someone's attention. Like I'd have a company that, I'd have friends that work at Apple or whatever, and they're like, oh, I got to warn you, we're gonna be announcing this new thing, and there's going to be a press release, and I'm just bracing myself because all of a sudden there's going to be all of this executive emails going back and forth, and we have to do that too, and we have to form a new division. And it's very, very easy to sort of get caught up in these industry intramurals. And for some reason, nobody's that passionate in large companies about, not nobody, but they're often not as passionate about the customer. What is the data of the customer? And it's very, very, maybe it's just human nature and competitiveness and testosterone and all those things that just, let's look at what the competition's doing. But the answers lie in the customer. So determining user intent is this sort of opportunity we had in a cycle we called user-driven development, which is, again, figuring out what the customer's doing. And we had the opportunity to really reimagine the Office document. What was that going to look like, and how was that going to be? And we've talked about contextual inquiry, which is going into the environment of the customer and observing what they're doing. And you get all kinds of interesting things like this. For example, we had this awesome mail merge feature in Word where you take the database data and you have all the fields and name, address, and all that, and you can create these great mail merge documents. But when you go into contextual inquiry and you go into the Office workplace, you see people getting all the stuff off the laser printer and then handwriting envelopes. So you realize the envelopes feature was not part of that feature design because you don't see that. Or you go into a place and you see somebody typing, I have a mainframe, how you have that green bar or sheets of paper. So they have this big sheet of data, this big pile of data, and there's a secretary re-entering mainframe data from a green bar piece of paper into an Excel spreadsheet. It never occurred to them to ask for that as a feature. So you don't get that on a feature. You're like, what are you doing? Well, I'm just re-entering the data. Well, why? It's in the mainframe. So we created this thing called the mainframe connectivity wizard, which allowed you to go get tab and comment limited data from a mainframe and import it directly into Excel. No one asked for that, but through contextual inquiry, we noticed somebody doing that kind of thing. Or you see somebody, with a calculator next to their thing doing, hand calculations, and you've got a spreadsheet up. Well, what does that tell you? So all kinds of stuff in contextual inquiry. Instrumented versions are versions of the product that just record every keystroke and mouse click and everything into a data file. It's time sequenced. And in a minute, I'll talk about some of the great innovations that came from studying really hard what instrumented version data we had. Focus groups, people understand those. A lot of good ways to get feedback there. Product support data, what are the top 10 things that are causing people to couple, be on the phone and say, I don't understand this. And these are just 4 of about 10 different inputs we had into a process we called user-driven development. But again, it always came back to the user. And when you have data on a user, you win the argument every time. And early days of Microsoft were kind of like loudest opinion in the room wins. And this really kind of was a sea change in the corporate culture. So just some things that came out of this whole user-driven development process. I've touched on some of them, but I'll go through this really quickly. And this is maybe 5 or 10 examples of hundreds. We noticed in Excel that 70% of the formula, 70% of the time, there was only one formula in the spreadsheet, and that was the sum function. So Excel has thousands of functions, very complex, trigonometric, all kinds of analysis features. 70% of the time, it's just the sum function. So let's add a button that just goes click and sums a column or a row of numbers, instead of saying parentheses equals parentheses sum A5, B7, and a parentheses. People want to do that. Make it a button, one button click. 30% of spreadsheets have no formulas at all. They're just lists. So, wow, what does that tell you? People use Excel as kind of a list manager. Well, maybe we should figure out how to put these little drop-down buttons where you can say, okay, what are the top 10 answers, or what, if you're recording all types of things. But 30% of the time, there's no formula at all. That was a big ta-da. It was a big insight when just studying people's sheets. People do things, classic thing, you would see people, they'd type in cell like B1. They'd say, the Paul Ryan budget. Space, 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 space. They hit the space bar like 50 times. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to take that label and they're trying to center it over multiple columns. And they don't quite know how to do that, so they just put it in over here. Well, there's a very easy feature that allowed you to sort of select 10 columns or however wide and just type in some text and center it over there. So understanding user intent by studying the data. Looking at thousands of spreadsheets people make, they type in time, budgets. People do budgets, January, February, March. So you probably all use the feature in Excel, the autofill feature, where you can grab the little button on the bottom right-hand corner and type in Jan, Feb, and fills out the whole year. You can go 1, 3, 5, and it'll go 7, 9, it just picks up sequences and patterns, and just the idea of making and building spreadsheets not so laborious and tedious. In Word, we noticed people's hands would be, it's just the weirdest kind of human behavior. People can type fast, and so they would type in, misspell the word the, because they're typing fast, and they'd notice it after 6 words. They've typed 6 more words. Well, you think, well, they just take the hands off the keyboard, mouse, click on that word, fix it, and go back. Nope, don't want to take my hands, so backspace, backspace, fix that word, retype all the words, because they don't want to take their hands off the keyboard. So, autocorrect, the feature that fixes, TEH to THE and all of those words and learns as you go, amazing feature. That was a circa 1992 feature that was truly innovative, saying, okay, Word's not really a word processor, it's a character processor. Let's make it a word processor. And now, of course, let's make it a sentence processor, if you think about grammar. So it's not going to be too long until I have friends that still work there. You can take a document and say, make it past tense. Now that's like high level. That's a document processor, not just a word processor. I talked about mail merge, Excel data into Word and PowerPoint. Just the idea of, again, things shouldn't have to be reformatted. They should work. It should inherit the properties of the thing that you're trying to do. Just watching people futz and stubbornly do all these things, it was just amazing to just see all this stuff that they're doing and watch the intended response. And a lot of times, someone will ask for something in a language or ask for something in a way that they don't really know kind of how to express it, or they'll do it in the paradigm that they understand. So like, for example, in Excel, you can select cells what we would call discontiguously. So you could select, hold down the Shift key or the Control key, and you could select this cell, this cell, this cell, this cell, and this cell, and they're not all connected. So people would do that because they'd want to reformat. So they want to make something red, bold, 18-point, and italic. So instead of clicking on a cell and going red, bold, 18-point, italic, they'd click on all these different cells, and then they do those things and apply to all those cells. So that was called discontiguous selection. So then people say, well, in Word, I want to be able to do discontiguous word selection because I want to do the same thing. I want to select this word, this word, this word, and this word, and this word that are not, they're not connected words. And then I want to be able to apply a bunch of formatting one time to all those separate words. Well, Word actually is just one big cell. So you can't really do discontiguous selection inside of Word very easily. Architecturally, it's a nightmare. So the user's asking for discontiguous word selection in Word. What they really want to do is quick formatting. So we came up with this thing called the Format Painter, which sucks up all the formatting attributes of a word and can be painted on anything you touch down on, which solves the problem without having the architectural problem of having Word, the container, have all these different cell type properties. So again, that's an example of how you would not necessarily do what someone's asking for, but sort of give them something that's even better. Recent as a concept, again, that seems really obvious. But back then, people would always say, I'm trying to find this document that I was working on yesterday because it's somewhere in their file system. And so the idea that the most recent things you worked on, which we just take for granted now, was like a big idea. It's like, we're going to give people access to the stuff they were recently working on. It's innovation. Give you some final, this last one or two slides here. I talked about how the Format Painter was an example of doing it well. Another times is you get conflicting data in an enterprise, and this is where you really just need top-level leadership. So we had this instrumented version data with Word that showed how often people print. So not surprisingly, people print in Word a lot more often than they print in Excel. So we were trying to figure out what the arrangement of the toolbar should be, because we wanted to be consistent across all these Office applications, the standard toolbar. There was all these custom toolbars, but the standard toolbar, which went, you know, new document, and file open, save, print. So the Word guys are like, okay, print is the fourth most common thing, so we're going to have it fourth from the left. The Excel guys are like, well, people never print, so it's way over on the right. And so you start using this thing, and we're in beta, and it's like, oh, no, I'm over here. Oh, no, you know, so you realize this isn't going to work. So you sit in this room, and you listen to these just impassioned arguments. No, you guys are idiots. It's got to be on the right. And eventually, you just get a good leader. So we had this guy, Pete Higgins, who was running the office, and he goes, you're both right. We're putting it on the left. Don't spend any more energy on this thing. There's no right answer. There's no one way to do it. We're going to be consistent. That's more important. So get over it, Excel guys. Get on to the next problem. Done. I don't want to hear about this again. So sometimes you do need just somebody to come in and say, listen, you know, data doesn't carry the day, and you just have to use common sense. That's probably more the Steve Jobs approach. And then sometimes you get a bunch of data, and you study it, and you think hard about what you're going to do, and then you deliver something that doesn't really land well. So here we had a bunch of people, you'd show them a demo, and they'd go, God, that's amazing. What version is that? Oh, that's the version you have. Oh, my version does that? Where's that feature? You know, and then you go on and on. So they always have this whole discovery process of what. So we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could just always teach people a new feature? Well, we tried using all this really complicated Bayesian inference technology. Remember? This guy, right? You know. So that didn't land so well, but it was actually really important work that set up a lot of other things later, but it wasn't a great implementation. Not, you know, even Apple had Mobile Me, not their finest hour. So, you know, that was sort of an example of that. So, final slide, I think, yes, is really implementing innovation. Like, so how do you go into the enterprise and get unstuck? And what are some things through that experience in the Office days where, you know, in the time I was involved with Office, and again, it was probably the brightest, most inspired collection of, you know, several hundred people that I've ever worked with. That business grew from $200 million to about $7 billion in a 4-year period. So that's like magic carpet ride, and it was really fun, kind of exhausting. But in that world, we had top management setting the tone. So there was an expectation of innovation, and there was no innovator's dilemma. So we didn't have this big business with PC Word, and we didn't have a character-based version of, we had chart and multiplan, but nothing really significant. So we knew that WordPerfect had a lot to lose. We knew that Lotus had a lot to lose. We were driving this paradigm shift, and we were just totally focused with no innovator's dilemma and top management that said, go for it. I remember getting this email from Bill Gates. It was like, once Lotus 1, 2, 3 shipped for Windows. So the whole market was stalled. People weren't buying Excel because Lotus is like, we're going to ship a version for Windows. And once that finally shipped and it was really buggy, you know, Bill sent this mail, which was later part of the DOJ investigation, and kind of got us all in trouble. But you know, basically said they're down. Let's go for it. Like now is the time that finally the market's unstalled. They've shipped a crappy product. We've got a great product, and let us just completely. I want to see you guys in 2 weeks come to me with no budget constraint, every idea you've ever had to gain 20 points of market share in 6 months. What are we going to do? That's cool. I mean, you know, work around the clock, stressed out, and all that, but still pretty cool. A culture of acknowledgement, I think, is another really important part about innovation, is because, you know, I've talked to friends who work at Apple, and there's this sense it's super secretive, and Steve Jobs did everything. Well, of course, Steve Jobs didn't do everything. And even if the public thinks that, internally making sure people feel acknowledged, I think is a big, you know, egos are complicated things. Capturing the imagination with a good demo, I don't think there's anything better than prototyping or demoing to really say, hey, let's go build this. And we would spend inordinate amounts of resources prototyping things and doing these super cool demos that people would just go, oh my God, you know, artificial intelligence, and that's, I've seen the answer now, you know. And I think that's still a great practice. You can write documents this thick, people don't read them. You know, visual, emotional capturing of the imagination, and then people say, go build that. I want you to go build that. What's it going to take? And even if you only end up building 60% of it, it's a great North Star. Being first matters. I think teams are much more inspired to innovate versus copy. I tell you, one of the most demoralized teams I've ever seen is the Zune team at Microsoft. So here's a bunch of people that were just told, okay, we have this, you know, Apple's running away with the MP3, the iPod market. We got to catch up. We got to do something. Go get it. You know, how do you catch up with somebody who has a 3-year head start on you? And then there's the Windows Phone team trying to catch up with the iPhone. And you know, it's not the highest morale situation. Now, the Office team, we were first, we were in the lead, we were doing great, we were truly innovating, and that's awesome. It's just a much better place. Not always the luxury you have, but a great place to be. You know, sales and marketing really need to echo the product experience. You know, we were, I was in charge of the product management for the Word, Excel, and the Office team. We had the best job in the world. I mean, we're out there, you know, working with the ad agency and, you know, doing all the product management stuff. We thought we were really talented marketers. I have seen all of the people on that team go off to other jobs and fail miserably, myself included, and had some successes too, but we had great products. And it was very, very easy to take those great products and, you know, promote them because that echoed the product experience, but it started with a great product. And we were also responsible for helping usher and, you know, define that product, but it was a great product. And innovation also has to extend, I think, into non-customer facing areas. For example, Apple, well, two examples. One, Apple's kind of a tired example, but Google, you know, what do people think of Google? Search engine. The thing I think Google's second best, besides their amazing 125 variable search algorithm that has more relevance than anything, including, you know, Bing doesn't have the same relevant results. The thing that Google's second best at is storage. They are an amazing storage company. Microsoft would build a lot of data centers, and I'd be sitting in these meetings about the cost per petabyte of storage. Google is like 5 times cheaper. They've just figured out storage as a technology, as a core competency. So this doesn't really show up in like cool user interface or anything, but it's a core competency that they're really, really good at. Apple's really good at supply chain management. I mean, Apple took the whole world of supply chain, and you know, if you've read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, you know, it points out that early days they had all this inventory problems, and they really kind of honed it down to a much more just-in-time thing where they got the whole supply chain just totally dialed. And their cost for producing glass and iPads and all that is just, it's amazing, startlingly low compared to what it would take companies who have less scale. You know, I sat in Microsoft's meetings about similar types of products, and it's just really hard to compete with Google and Apple's scale because they innovate in all of these ways that aren't customer facing. And those people, I hope, and those companies feel acknowledged and feel good about it, because that's a key part of what makes those companies profitable, which allows them to do all kinds of things. So that's, those would be the top thoughts, and that's it. So I guess we have, I finished a minute and a half ahead of time.
Excellent job. Yeah, we have time for a few questions now, or later.
So Microsoft's interesting because of exactly what you talked about. Innovation, and all of a sudden you're chasing. What happened there? Was it more of a, like, they didn't foresee things happening soon enough, or did they just think, well, maybe we need to just play in all these different areas, so the only way to play now is to catch up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long discussion that I would abbreviate and say, Bill stepped down, and I think that had a big piece of it. I think there was a big part of innovator's dilemma. So there was early tablets, for example, prototypes in the late 90s that were basically Kindles. And they all got looked at through, how is that going to help Windows? And what if that hurts Windows? That's innovator's dilemma thinking, right? As opposed to, let's reimagine and let's cannibalize Windows. We don't care, because if we don't, someone else will, which is what happens, right? So, I mean, I have, man, if Seattle wasn't such a small town, I got the book. I mean, I have emails that, talked about what people talking about Google's search engine, executive discussion, and somebody saying, I think Google's really onto something there. They're kind of getting user and consumer desires and advertisers together at the same time, and that's the stupidest thing I've ever, and just not, all of a sudden, whoa, this search monetization thing, kind of a big deal. And there's people at Microsoft that saw it, really smart people that saw in 98, 99 what was happening. Certainly by 2000, very clear. But, big company doesn't quite break through. So, and that's not to say, I mean, there are groups today, the Connect is an example of recent Microsoft great innovation, just the way it's supposed to happen. Microsoft Research was out doing all this stuff about motion and all that stuff. Where are we going to take that technology? Let's put it in a gaming system. Oh, we already have one of those things. Great execution, great name, well done, super cool, right? So it's still happening, but if I look at the $9 billion of Microsoft Research investment every year and saying, okay, we got Connect, what else did we get? I mean, Microsoft's been working on voice recognition forever. How come there was no Siri? They had all the pieces in place for Siri. Didn't do it, or didn't productize it, right? So, and again, that's part of the distributed nature of things. So.
So you do find yourself in a situation where you're behind. Should you, do you have to chase after taillights, or would you suggest to a company that they still go after the customer and maybe find a different way to do it?
Yeah, there's entering a category that exists, you could say, is chasing taillights. But I think there's ways to enter categories that exist. We call that chasing taillights, but do it in a way that is true to, plays to your strengths. The Zune example for me is really tough because it didn't play to any, Zune didn't play to any Microsoft strengths. It didn't integrate with anything else from Microsoft. I mean, Apple iPod was strategic, right? You had iTunes, you had this, you had this digital hub concept, you have everything flowing out of it. It just worked. Zune didn't really, and then the Windows guys were like, what are you guys doing? We got Windows Media Player and, infighting and all this stuff. So it's like if you're going to chase taillights, you have to have the macro infrastructure to go do it. I mean, it's interesting now that Apple, this recently announced we're going to get in the radio, the Spotify, Pandora radio business. I looked at that one. I haven't spent much time investigating. I'm like, is that the first time that Steve's gone? Is that the first sign that, Apple's maybe lost their edge or something? I don't know. Maybe there was some grand plan where I don't understand. But that was my first kind of head scratcher going, wow, that's not Apple being true to Apple. It seems like them doing something other people do. I'm waiting for like Apple TV to come out and reinvent the whole TV market, right? That to me would be what I would more expect from Apple.
I'm curious what changes you saw in the level of risk tolerance Microsoft throughout your time there. I mean, that's, to me, one of the things that seems to have happened to Microsoft is they had all these innovative opportunities to seek out, but then they became so dependent or risk averse to trying to depart ways from existing code base or intellectual property assets. And I'm curious to see if you saw something similar or what the ability was to push something through that was riskier.
Yeah, I mean, it just slowly declined over time. I would say early on, Bill used to always talk about Microsoft is in it for, we have a long-term horizon. Every employee had a long-term horizon. And you realize Microsoft, people didn't know their salary. It was unbelievable. It was, you were just signed up for this quest, this mission, and you just climbed aboard and you trusted, right? You know, in later days of Microsoft, it was like, okay, Mark, you think you're going to come in a little short here? We're reforecasting. What's your quarter going to look like? And it is now down to a quarter-to-quarter expectation. And you know, and to watch it sort of fantastically unravel, spectacularly unravel. You know, I was in a division that decided that they were going to grow 40%. They didn't really have the product base to do it. And I was told that I was supposed to grow at 100% my business one year, because I had a really good year the year before, 60% growth. And I'm like, I can't do that. Here's all the math. Here's all. No, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. You can't wish people into growth, right? So then you go through this whole corrosive cycle, right, which is, okay, we're going to grow. And I can't argue. Finally settle on a compromise number that I'm still not comfortable with. Oh gosh, one goes by, we didn't make the number. We're going to reforecast down. Why? You have to, because I said, you know, and you just go through this whole thing, and it's just, no one's focused on solving anybody's problems. Everyone's covering their butt and fighting with each other, and who am I going to get the biggest raise? And you know, it's so, you know, willing yourself kind of into growth. You know, I was so inspired reading the jobs thing, because, you know, as much as a difficult personality sounded like he was going to work with, he's like, no, we're going to build world-class products, and they will be the path to our door, and certainly seemed to work.
Having been through both of those periods at Microsoft, what was your advice from an innovation perspective, to the guys at Google be where they are now, trying to move into new spaces, take on, chase taillights? From an innovation perspective, what would your advice be there?
Well, I would applaud them I would tell them to do less. The people I know at Google, you know, they're one of somebody's 20 direct reports. The accountabilities are very weird, and they seem to be just all over the map and still seem. But I would applaud them for, there's certain businesses that seem to be really complementary, like Gmail and Google Docs, and the way they're integrating and sort of making those businesses be sticky and strategic together. So I think there's a handful of things they're doing that are really great. I've long contended that Google's still a pretty good, like at 500 I bought a bunch of Google stock. It's like at 700 now, because I still think that the thing that plagues Google now is their cost structure. They're spending too much. But their core business is still doing great. They just have to stop throwing so much stuff against the wall and be a little more selective. And I think that, you know, now that, Larry Page is trying to instill a little bit more of that discipline, people I know that work there. So do less, but not nothing less. You know, have some research, and have things that are really kind of part of their ecosystem.
How do you see the position of like a designer in the innovation process, or design-led thinking, like compared to like, you know, anthropology degree or computer science?
Are you talking about as an educational choice?
Or yeah, just like, is there a role of designer in innovation and design-led thinking, like as far as like research or?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that anyone that has customer empathy and can sort of, again, I'm saying consumer, maybe you're not designing consumer products, maybe it's business to business, but end user empathy. Whether it's computer science or social anthropology or whatever, I've seen like really talented people come out of all of those different places. I think it's much more of kind of a mindset and an ability to really look at what somebody's doing and try to abstract what they're really trying to do, you know, regardless of the degree.
So you touched on it. You mentioned Howard Schultz and Starbucks and how they've reinvented from where they were again.
Yes.
And they've done great because he came back.
Right.
So Gates decides that he wants to come back. Probably not going to happen, but let's say he does. What do you think I mean, he's still the chairman, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, so would he come back and cut stuff off, do you think, from your experience in working with them?
Yeah, I mean, Bill's not going to come back. I mean, he's you know, how many people get the opportunity to change the world twice, right? And I think it's so cool what he's doing. But, you know, I've always said to people, I think Steve Ballmer is absolutely the best guy for the job. And I think it's an impossible job. It's just too big. And there's just, so I would break the thing apart. you know, my 2 cents. And it kind of functions that way. Like, you know, this is like the Accounting Reemployment Act at Microsoft. I mean, you want to borrow some code from somebody, they're going to figure out what the cost of that. There's going to be some internal transfer pricing. There, you know, nobody gives, because everyone's P&L, P&L, P&L. Rewards are all based on your P&L. Guns are pointed at all, you know. So there's no altruism, right? So the divisions, this idea that, oh, there's all this synergy between code sharing, phooey, doesn't happen. Pay me, pay me, pay me, right? I mean, so it's kind of acts as a company that's broken up under the same stock ticker symbol, where all the CFOs of all the divisions are always just trading, you know, trading P&L internal transfer. So I just break the thing up. I don't think the synergy that is alleged is really there.
And it was there.
Yeah, and in many cases, you know, a very quick story, I know we got to go, but I was running this advertising business and for the entertainment division, and I wanted, my customers, advertisers, wanted Flash. So I wanted to bring Flash to Xbox. That was interesting because we had Silverlight. So there's a pragmatic decision of I can get another $100 million if I have Flash. There's $100 million of ad money out there if I can just bring Flash and have a value proposition to advertisers that says, take the stuff you already have and just port it over. Minor modification. But then there's this higher order, you know, so I'm in this meeting with Ballmer. I'm like, what's the battle? And, you know, he's screaming and he's doing his thing. I'm like, Steve, what's the battle and what's the war? I said, if you're telling me Silverlight is so strategically important to the future of the company that this little parochial battle that I'm fighting isn't worth it, $200 million bucks in Microsoft, it's rounding it, right? So then, peace, I'm out. I'll just leave it alone. And we'll just accept the fact that we can't do it. No, you know, I want you to make your number. In fact, I want you to stretch. Go big, go big, go big. Well, I need Flash to go big. You know, so this is before, you know, Flash had its problem. Was, you know, but so that's the kind of like weird things you get into. So I go over to Bob Muglia, who runs the Silverlight division. I explained to him this. I said, you should support Flash. We come up with this whole PR strategy. It says that the Flash team, the Silverlight team is going to announce their support for Silverlight on Xbox. And then we're going to announce Adobe's support, so they don't look like followers. So I give them, you know, a fig leaf to hide behind, and we do it all, and we orchestrate the whole thing, and so we don't look like fools. And that's how we had to do it. But man, major caloric expenditure to get to that thing. But that's the kind of thing you have in a big company, right? And is it and, you know, it's not. No one was acting unreasonably. It's just complicated. It's just, you know, Steve wasn't acting, I mean, well, maybe Steve was, but, you know, the Silverlight guys had every right to think the way they did, and they think they're the war, and I'm just the battle. So fine, but someone has to decide what's the battle and what's the war. And absent that, I'm just doing my job. And my commitments say Mark's going to make X dollars, and I need Flash to go do it, so I'm just going to go bullheadedly and do that. And if I'm upsetting some larger agenda, someone has to reforecast my commitments and say, okay, you don't have to do that because the way you have to do that is going to cause more pain over here. But that, it's just too big and moving too fast, and no one's sort of, you know, looking at everything cross group. I actually hired a guy once to look at all of our divisions' commitments across each other. And he's like, okay, like 40% of these are competing with each other. Like if you do this, you'll screw up this. So it's this lattice work, this interconnected mess, right? And we never fixed it. It just kind of plugs on. So it's too big.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much.